today. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is a City of Hardeeville City Council workshop in council chambers on 205 Main Street, Hardeeville, South Carolina, 29927, Monday, May 5th, 2025 at 2:04. This is a workshop. The rules of order are relaxed. Everybody can jump in and speak, but please wait till the previous speaker has yielded the floor. Having said that, Mr. Gruber, we have one agenda item, and that is the 2026 budget. Take us away.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Excited to be here with you today. My first budget opportunity to work with you. And I want to start from the outset by acknowledging that this budget was really a collaborative effort. I want to thank John. I want to thank Amy. I know she's not here, but I want to thank the finance staff and want to thank all of our department heads. They've provided not only a lot of assistance with building this budget, but a lot of good feedback. And they've already started kind of taking this information, disseminating it to staff, making sure that they, one, feel informed and that they're part of this process. And so it's not just us kind of dictating and then telling them. They understand that what they've asked for has been taken into consideration, how it's been applied, how things are prioritized within the budget, and then ultimately kind of what we're coming forward with in terms of our recommendations to you, which we're going to cover today. So John and I are going to tag team this presentation, but at any point in time, if you have questions, if you want to dive deeper into something, look closely at something, or if you want more information, just stop us and let us know as we're kind of going through this, because I know it can be a lot. But I am very confident that the budget that we are presenting to you today accomplishes a couple things. One, it builds upon our strategic plan that we've talked about in terms of what are our mutual goals, what do we want to accomplish. And as I indicated back in January when we were having that session, to me, a strategic plan and a budget go hand in glove together. They need to be complementary of one another. So what you see in the strategic plan, we are attempting to accomplish in the budget. And again, what you see prioritized in the budget is a direct result of that strategic planning initiative. And so that is how we've approached this. Beyond that, we have tried to be as fiscally conservative as we can. So our kind of anticipated projections, both for how we will finish this year and kind of what we're looking at in terms of revenue for next year, come from a standpoint of a conservative view. We would rather err on the side of caution and ultimately project less revenue. And if we wind up with excess or surplus revenues, then great, but we want to be conservative from the outset. We have also tried to make this budget as efficient as possible. So we have gone through, and the department heads can attest to this, we have looked at and examined every line item, both within their departmental budgets, at the city as a whole, and then within our capital projects, so that at the end of the day, if you have a question about anything, any departmental line item or departmental projects, let us know, and we'll be happy to give you more information on what that details are. If we have any of the historical information, we can cover that as well. But I say all that to say we feel very confident that this is a budget that is worthy of consideration, that will meet the needs of our community, and that, as I've characterized to staff, I believe in the face of the continued growth that our community is going through, this budget allows us to maintain our existing level of service delivery to the public. I can't sit here and say that I think we're really expanding our reach, but I think what we're doing now really kind of preserves and protects the existing service level that we're providing to the public. And so with that, I'm going to kick off the presentation by having John open us up.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I too am happy to be here presenting this to you. Just so you know, as Josh mentioned, Amy can't be here. Jordan Tootin in the blue and Brooke Jones in the black are the other two members of our current finance team that you don't see a lot from, but they certainly have had a hand in helping us steer this to where we are today. So now that said, you see we had we have a schedule that started all the way back towards the end of January. We've done a number of things throughout. We are currently at the stage where on April 17th, y'all received your budget books. So you've had those for a couple of weeks. And then you see that we submitted it to you again on the 17th, and we've published the appropriate public hearing notice. And here we are today on May 5th at the second budget workshop. So for a snapshot, as Josh likes to say, a picture tells 1,000 words. This is a snapshot of the general fund, our CIP, and all the other funds totaled to $75,879,894. And then you see on the left-hand side where we've grouped together some of the different departments. Again, the city manager's proposed budget maintains the millage for Jasper County at 95 and for Beaufort County at 109. And of course, we all acknowledge that it's city council's purview to decide what those two numbers end up being.
For what it's worth, I know that you're out in the public a lot talking to constituents, other stakeholders and community members. If you get asked budget questions, this slide is intended to be a great resource. At a high level, it takes a lot of our materials and kind of boils it down into easy to explain and easy to express concepts. So the amount of our budget, the amount of millage, how our budget is used, and the capital projects that we're going to expend on, which is, one of the biggest line items within the entire budget, all that information is there for you on one page. And so it becomes a really handy resource, again, when you're out in the public talking to folks. If they have a budget question, 8 times out of 10, you'll probably be able to answer it from this slide.
Now, you say Jasper County 95, is that supposed to be Hardyville?
Well, yeah, and that should be clear.
Okay.
Hardyville, of course, is in 2 counties.
Yeah, right.
The part of Hardyville that's in Jasper County has a millage rate of 95.
Okay, all right.
Part of the
Jasper County was higher than that.
the other much smaller piece
Threw me off.
has, which is Beaufort County, is 100.9. So, thank you for that. The next thing is just we wanted to lay out what we're hoping to, or staff sees being able to get out of this today is just really nail down, get everybody comfortable and ideally on the same page with the operating budget. The capital budget discussion is set for a week from today. And some of our desired outcomes were the review of the departmental operating budgets. You have each department's detail in your books. So we're prepared to walk through that should that be desired. We have a new approach to employee salary increases we want to talk to everybody about. And then the other things that were discussed throughout a number of meetings were the budget stabilization and what we might do with that over the next few years. And then also talk some more about the millage rate and see what council would like to do with that. And then with that, I believe this is back to you, Josh.
So in the recommended budget, there's a number of things that we want to highlight just because we think that there are significant discussion points. But so the first one is a change that I am proposing with regards to how we go about doing annual compensation adjustments for staff. Historically, the city, at least for the last several years, had done 2 annual adjustments, one for cost of living and then a separate one for merit-based increases. What I am proposing to do is essentially roll those 2 items together and make it one annual adjustment to salaries rather than twice a year. And I think my recommendation is going to be that annual increase be sufficient enough to take into account impacts such as inflation and other things that you would see built into cost of living. But at the end of the day, my preference for staff is that increases to salary are based upon merit and performance. I've told staff that, one way to look at it is if you're getting a cost of living adjustment, it means you did just enough not to get fired in that particular year. It doesn't mean that you actually performed well. And we know that a substantial majority of our staff all perform at a high level. So we're not too worried about having to address underperformance, But I think it's better to take that cost of living, to add it into what would be ultimately a merit increase and just have one-time annual adjustment. To me, that brings us a little bit more in line with a number of our peer communities around this area. And when we get to the end of the presentation, we're going to show you some of the survey data that we obtained, kind of showing where we're at as compared to those other communities. But that is a substantial change from prior practices. What's also important about that, and again, we'll talk about it a little bit more detail later on, is that not only am I proposing to make a change in this manner, but I'm also proposing to fund a salary and compensation study that would take place over the course of this next fiscal year. And the recommendations coming out of that study would likely be a significant point of discussion when we are going to adopt our budget next year. So we don't know kind of what the results of that are going to be, so it's hard to anticipate which way it's going to go. But conceptually, I think now would be a good time to implement this type of change, because not only are we giving the biggest benefit to staff in terms of a larger one-time increase at the beginning of the year, rather than spreading that out over two different 6-month periods, but it also then piggybacks off of the adjustments that we would propose to make as part of a salary and compensation study for next year. So that gives us an opportunity then to look at our merit-based performance evaluation system and make some tweaks to how we go about administering that program so that it aligns a little bit better with a one-time a year adjustment rather than a multi-year adjustment. So that's one point in the budget that you'll see. Another point, and this was a conversation that we had during our first budget workshop, was to understand where you all want to go from a policy standpoint when we look at our rainy day fund. So we maintain a number of different reserve accounts. The rainy day fund is probably best characterized as a reserve account that we put money in and then we don't touch it. Unless some kind of natural disaster or some other kind of significantly unaccounted for event occurs, this is the fund that we just stash money away in for a rainy day, as it's entitled. And so we can show you that with the budget now, we are within our current guidelines of 20% as a minimum. And then going forward, there's a recommendation that when or if settlement funds from the ongoing lawsuit with Jasper County become available, it would be an option for you all to consider in terms of using some or all of those proceeds to add to the rainy day fund to increase our percentage. Our goal over the next several years is going to be to get to 25%. And again, at the end of this presentation, we're going to show you some comparative data from other jurisdictions that are around us. But ideally, we'll be able to slowly increase that percentage 1 or 2% a year at a time until we reach the goal of 25%. And then lastly, this is going to be kind of the ultimate question for you as policymakers to decide. What should the millage be for next year? So the way that we have structured this budget is in direct response to the feedback that we received from y'all at the first budget workshop, which was to do two things. One, present a budget that maintains the millage at its current level, and two, to present a budget that reduces the budget by 1 mil. And so within your budget presentation materials, we've covered both of those items. I can tell you from my standpoint, the reason why the proposed budget reflects a 0 millage increase, one, is because it's partly in response to the majority of feedback that I heard from council members on that issue. And two, I believe that it helps support a conversation that we're really going to have next week when we go to dive into the capital budget, which is we're able at this point in time to financially pay for a number of what I would call small to medium-sized capital projects. The revenues that we generate are sufficient to support those size of projects, but we have on our list a number of very large and very expensive capital projects that you've indicated you'd like to see move forward. And when we sit down and start looking really at the math of that, we struggle in terms of creating capacity to pay for those large capital projects. So part of the reason why the budget that I'm presenting to you keeps the millage flat is because, in my opinion, that gives us more flexibility in future years to have a conversation about directing resources to be dedicated for capital projects. And again, similarly to raising our budget stabilization rainy day fund, if we are consistent in contributing funds for that purpose for the next several years, using budget discipline and some other tools, I think at the end of a 4 or 5 year period, we could have the resources that we would need to be able to take on some of these large scale capital projects. So for those reasons, the budget you are being provided to today proposes to keep the millage neutral, but ultimately that's going to be a question for you all to decide. All right, I think we're back to John covering the financial projections.
As you-
Offer to council, if you have, they're gonna go through a number of things, and if you don't mind, if anybody has a question about something that's said, please raise your hand and, be acknowledged, by John and ask your question, okay?
Oh, happy to do that. Absolutely.
Work for you,
Yes, sir.
John?
Absolutely. I'm just here as part of your show, sir. Do whatever you want. So as you see here, we have our last, and a number of these slides, as we've gotten into it, you'll start to see that they're same from year to year. We're trying to build that familiarity to make this as smooth a process as we throw all this information at you guys. You'll see here we have the 22, 23, and 24 actual numbers, the 25 projected, and then the 26 budget and projected. I will note that you'll see the unassigned does go down a little bit in 26. We do plan for some of our capital projects to spend a little bit of capital money or of that on some capital projects, and or at least that's the recommendation. The other thing I know you're seeing here is if you look at the local A and local H, you see we've built up quite a war chest, and then here we propose to spend a lot of it. In our later slides, you will see that what all is planned with those funds. Then at the bottom, you see our budget stabilization, and this is just a function of the general fund budget and how we calculate that, goes up by not quite $500,000. Then you see the land acquisition decreasing. Again, that's related to one in particular CIP project that we'll be prepared to talk about next week. And then you see the accrued merit and PTO. That's been pretty steady over the last number of years, so we left that projection at $250,000. Again, you see the unassigned dropping a little bit, and then the DA fees continue to come in, and that those funds become available as well.
John?
Sir?
I have a question, or maybe just something for us all to consider. When you say for instance, budget stabilization fund is up $500,000. If I'm reading this correct, it's actually up from 2024. In terms of a whole number, it's up almost $2 million. Okay, and I think, and I'm gonna come back to this later on. We look at percentages, but sometimes maybe we also have to look at the whole number. We are almost $2 million more in that fund, even though a couple of years ago we reduced it from 25 to 20. We're up almost $2 million. Am I reading that right, John?
Yeah.
Over 2 years, you're up that much, correct? Yeah, so we were up about $1.3 million last year, and then another 500,000 or so this year for the proposed 26.
Right. So we're, by virtue of our budget growing, the whole number is growing also.
Right.
And again, that's the funds that we would have, if we have a cataclysmic event like I think Ms. Guzman will sometimes talk about a train wreck, or obviously we're in that hurricane flood kind of zone. So the cost of doing those things, to the mayor's point, the numbers going up, but the cost to recover from any of that are certainly going up as well.
Also, one of the numbers that do concern me is the land acquisition fund. As we've spent money buying these properties, we're down to $1.3 million.
So that's proposed. Right now, the current balance is $3 million. We're proposing to use about $2 million of that primarily to support the construction of Fire Station 83. And so that's part of next week's discussion.
82,
82,
sorry.
I'm sorry, 82. That's part of our discussion of the capital budget next week is a portion of that construction cost is being proposed to be funded from land acquisition, primarily because the revenues that went into the land acquisition account came from the sale of the existing fire station and then the sale of land for public safety out on Perrysburg Road.
Okay. I look at the whole number, and we've been able to make purchases like, on Main Street and,
And we've got a couple of others that are in the pipeline.
on White Hardy Boulevard, we're looking at other. And, I want to make sure that we're in a position to continue to make strategic purchases. I think that's really very important as some of these properties may become available. So I don't know what we do about it, but if we should, I don't want to use that money for anything other than land acquisition. Now, if it came from the fire department sale, that's one thing, it should go back, understood. But I would prefer to leave land acquisition for land acquisition.
Understood. And when we cover Fire Station 82, I would argue that that's probably one of the highest capital project needs that we have right now, primarily because we're under a time deadline with the lease of the existing land. We don't know that the owner would agree to any kind of extensions, and so in a worst-case scenario, our existing lease expires and we no longer have a home to have this equipment and this staff located there, which I'm not sure how ISO might respond to that, but they could say, if you don't have a facility, we can't count it towards meeting the requirements. And therefore, everybody's insurance could go up in that area, or they might not write insurance in there, which is even worse. And so we need to move that project forward because of the time sensitivity to it. And because it's not in an existing PDD area, we really don't have DA fees available. Our future fire stations in a number of other areas, we won't have this much difficulty because we are banking development fees to pay for that. But this one is really kind of in a little bit of no man's land in that it doesn't fall within one. And so we're looking for funding sources from other areas. And if you need to find $2 million, we start struggling a little bit finding that unless we want to pull it out of our, not the rainy day fund, but our unassigned, fund balance, which would just drop that balance lower. And so it's, do we spend the money out of land acquisition and leave the fund balance higher, or do we spend the money out of fund balance and leave the land acquisition higher? I don't know.
Combination.
Certainly could be. We could split the baby and do $1 million each instead of $2 million out of one. But that's, we'll dive into that a little bit more, but just know that that's kind of involved in that analysis. Yep, there we go.
Okay. So here we have the operating budget, 24 and 25. You see the 24 actuals, the 25 budget, how we believe we're going to end up in fiscal 25, and then our 26 budget. With this page and the next, you will see the balanced budget, $75,879,000, almost $880,000. On those two slides, you see on the front page, you have the general fund and all the pieces of that coming down to that $40,439. And then you have the expenses here for the other funds on that second page. But again, balanced budget, it's 75, let's say 75,900,000.
Could you go back one, John, please? Sure. I just want to point this out to council because I think it's important as we go along. We are increasing our expenditures from the year-end projection of 2025 by almost $6 million, $5.8 million. See that? Bottom on the right.
Yes, sir. I was gonna say, this number is where we're projecting to wind up at the end of the fiscal year. This was the adopted budget figure for last year, so it's really the difference between this number and this number, which is a little, about 4.5 million. And that, some of that is based upon our increase in operational expenditures, so we're projecting to hire, I believe, 8 additional staff persons. And then we also have increases to salary and benefit costs, and then just overall increases to operational conditions. And so, yes, there's no question that number is going up.
And it's up quite a bit from 2 years ago.
Yeah, not as big of a jump as what was made from 24 to 25, where it was almost 9 million, but it is still continuing to increase. What makes it a little bit difficult from an apples to apples standpoint is that this also, I think, includes capital expenditures to some degree.
There's some debt service in there.
Yeah, the debt service, that's,
Debt service is down here. You see, we've got 1.2 million more there. And then you see also, we added some ambulance service in the last little bit too. So there's some costs there as well. There's other things, of course, but those are 2 that just popped to mind.
We're spending money?
we are, yes, sir.
That was my only point.
And this is one that's gone up quite a bit, but everybody understands why. And while it's nearly twice as much, it's certainly a good thing.
But that, on the other hand, the income from that department is going up also.
That one in particular, yes, and
That's almost a profit center in and of itself, if I understand properly.
Given the revenues that we collect from permit and inspection fees, yes, those positions typically generate more than what they cost in terms of personnel expenses. Now, I have to be careful in that it's a little bit unfair to use that analysis across the entire organization, because not every department has income producing positions. Does not mean that they are in any way, shape, or form less important to our overall service delivery. We just don't generate income in certain areas. And I pick on John and say the finance, yes, they help collect it, but it's not a revenue generation in and of itself. But if we didn't have the finance team, we wouldn't be able to make payroll, we wouldn't be able to pay our bills. There's a whole lot of very important functions that we would not be able to do without their support. And so
The reason I pointed out, because again, history gets lost. And I think it's important to understand. And I think John was probably the only one here in terms of council, and a lot of staff wasn't here. Brandon will remember that building safety department was handled as a third-party Dennis Corporation.
Long time.
Right, remember? And then it got to the point where the income from all the houses, going from 200 permits a year to 1,500, it became a better use of funds or to hire our own staff. And that's why that keeps going up, so that's why I said that's a profit center in itself, because that's how it began.
And that's a constant analysis that we are doing internally is this a service that is best provided internally by our own staff, or is this a service that is best provided by contracting with a third party? And it really kind of goes back and forth depending upon what we're looking at. My focus with building services in particular, again, I go back to service level. We've got 7 full-time staff members now, but if you look at the volume of inspection requests that they are being asked to handle, we're starting to slip in terms of our turnaround time. So I would say typically somewhere between 2 to 5 days is usually a fairly good turnaround time. We're now at 10 to 12 days. And that's causing some obvious issues, not only with scheduling, but then people who are filling out and grabbing spots but aren't necessarily ready for it, but they're trying to anticipate. And it's just causing a number of issues. So by adding the additional positions that I'm proposing, the hope is that we will be able to maintain an average of somewhere between 18 to 20 inspections per person per day as a kind of a standard volume of inspections within that department. And that should hopefully allow us to get caught back up a little bit in terms of the turnaround time, and then stay on top of the new requests coming in without overloading that department, because if we have a recession or if we have some kind of significant economic downturn and all the builders kind of pump the brakes, we don't want to have to wind up doing a reduction in force if we can in any way avoid it. So this is hopefully striking the balance between adding enough staff members to meet our current service level needs, but not adding too many that it becomes a problem if we ever had to scale back.
Josh, what about the, big increase, Festival on Main? For fiscal year 26?
Yeah.
It's a huge increase.
So some of that is within the programming itself. There's a couple of things that we're looking at doing differently from what we've done in the past. One of the things that I saw just in observing last year's festival was that parking and parking safety were somewhat of a concern, particularly down Randall Street, out on Main Street. A lot of vehicles, a lot of movement, kids running back and forth. And so we are really revising that this year. And so a big focus of ours is going to be having a park and ride system. We've negotiated with Royal Live Oaks Academy to use their parking lot, and we'll shuttle people there. We've also contracted to bring shuttle service directly within Margaritaville. We've talked with Pulte about bringing service into Sun City, but the idea being that if we can bring people in without them bringing their vehicles here, it will make it less congested and maybe a little bit easier to manage here. So that is just one aspect of it. I think some of it is also taking expenses that were occurred across several different departments and kind of collapsing them within just this program. But when it comes to the festival itself, historically, that has been, the goal with that, I think, is a break-even enterprise. I think maybe last year we actually generated some revenues above and beyond what the program expenses were. But for us, the goal is just let's at least cover our expenses. And so Jen and her team and a number of folks that are on the committee for this have been working really hard to make it a really engaging event that people are going to enjoy, but that every year we're going to consistently build upon, either in terms of infrastructure, security, program offering, something. And so, yes, that number is going up significantly, but I also believe that the revenues that are associated with it will go up significantly as well.
And that is some good ideas.
We ready to cruise on? Okay. All right. For 9, the last couple of years when we've done this, that we've been asked about the recreation department in specifically. So you see the budgeted revenues for the recreation department and their expenditures, and you see that the percent of what the cities what is subsidized by their own income is the 19%, and so that's there for discussion purposes or just as a data point. And I don't know that Josh or I have any commentary on it. We're just ready to.
My only commentary with it is, as a municipality, our core is to provide public safety services, because those are typically services that people can't otherwise provide to themselves. But what really creates the true quality of life and the heartbeat of a municipality are the things like this program, which allows for opportunities for everybody within the community. And I would tell you there's very, very few programs that are self-sustaining. This is something that is subsidized to the public because, again, it is a benefit to them in terms of quality of life to have access to these resources. And so we were asked to pull together some data points just to kind of show what that translates to. But I would encourage all of the Hardeeville residents, if you live in a gated community, know that you're contributing towards this. And so make use of these resources. They're there to benefit you just as much as they are for anybody else.
Right.
And so just encourage them to reach out and make use of them.
I had asked Josh to add this. This wasn't in the original thing. There were a number of questions that I went over with him last week, including why the Festival in May went up so much. He gave me that answer last week. But I don't dispute the expenditure of $1 million in recreation, but I think it's something that we all need to understand what we are doing. And I think we're doing something really good when we talk about the recreation department and the services that we bring. But it's just, again, something we need to understand, especially us in council who are constantly asked, and for those of you who read my article that I'm gonna put out, is, and I get asked all the time, what do our taxes pay for? And it's good for people to understand that these are good, positive things that our tax money is being spent on.
Okay. So moving on, we have the aforementioned A-tax and the H-tax analysis. If we look really here, we see where we ended up in '24. We had a total of almost $3 million. You see for what we've budgeted for how we think we're going to come out this year, we're going to spend that down, and then quite a bit more in our proposed 26 budget. Now, what you see there is, wow, that's a big decrease. But what you also, the reason that's happening is you have your Juju Hudson Phase 2 work in both, being paid for out of both. You have the rec center parking lot project, which has been a long time coming. You have the splash pad, which we have talked about for a number of years, and we see we have 1.5 million programmed in 26 alone for that. Beginning this year, we started with a sports tourism program manager being funded out of local A tax. And then we also have the workforce housing, where we're allowed to spend up to 15% of our revenue for workforce housing. And a number of years ago, council had indicated that was something we wanted to do. So we have that in there going out. And then again, down in H-tax, you see the sidewalk and basketball parking. And then you also see basketball side path parking. And then again, the $1.5 million to go with the 400,000 up here. And then the principal and interest expense. And again, the principal and interest expense is on the notes we have for the rec center. So that's what that is. Any questions about A and H tax?
I think the big thing to take away from here is our collections are remaining relatively steady. That's something that, again, based upon the overall economy, how people are looking at spending their discretionary incomes, that's something that can fluctuate a good amount. Before I left Hilton Head, I know we were seeing somewhere between an 8 to 10% decrease in hotel stays and restaurant spending and things like that, just because when people get concerned about the overall state of the economy, that's one of the first things that they pull back on are all those discretionary things. And so we maintain that where we're at now in our continued collections, we feel comfortable that this is an appropriate figure. And so a lot of what we're doing is just spending the reserves that we've been building up over the last several years on these capital projects.
I think this page just points out the absolute priority and urgency of getting commercial interest into the city.
Absolutely. That will make a very big impact. Every time we add a new restaurant, every time we add a new hotel, both of those contribute to our A tax and H tax. And I also want to call out real quick, just the position that you funded here with the sports tourism recreation manager. I really think that has, we've only scratched the surface of what that position and what those activities can bring to our area. I can tell you from my own personal example, I have been to many ball tournaments at much more inferior fields than what we have here. And so there's really no reason why we can't be out looking to capitalize on the quality of facilities that we have here and bring in some of those athletic events that will maybe spend at the restaurants, stay at hotels, otherwise, be in this area. And as we have more commercial development and more opportunities for them, that will just be more of an opportunity to keep those folks here within the city when they do come to visit.
And right now, Josh, there's plenty of places to go in Hilton Head. Here, I'm not gonna send them to Motel 8 or,
No.
we need places for them to stay.
Absolutely.
Exit 8 is
Good
doing
rates
good.
there.
Yeah.
Yep.
You use it a lot?
Well, and I'll tell you this,
I'm not going there.
for the age group that Willis is targeting now, most of them are probably in the regional area from Charleston to Savannah. But as that opportunity grows in the future and when we add the older kids, that's when you really start getting the teams that'll travel from around. And when we have hotels that we feel, good about offering, we can partner with them, offer incentives. There's a number of things that we can do, but really just getting that programming started is a good place for us right now.
It's a good thing. It's just, you have to, Sutton, with that hotel in the middle and all those restaurants that were supposed to be around it 7 years ago. That we could accommodate sports tourism if they had done what they promised they were gonna do. Right, John?
And that, also, I think that, parking lot, addition will pay for itself.
It certainly,
There's a lot of frustrated people.
it will get
sometimes can't
used.
find
There's no
parking.
doubt about that.
And I think that'll, like I say, add a lot of more to the rec budget in the end.
If we're good with that.
Okay. So I always want you to know what it was that came from the department heads. So this slide basically shows the asks for this year. So every position that you see here, from general government, police, fire, public works, these are all the positions that were requested at the outset of the budget process. And so in total, that was 47 new positions, 44 full-time employees and 3 part-time employees. And again, I will tell you this was probably one of the most difficult aspects of putting together the budget, because all of these positions are supported in one way or another. And so it really comes down to trying to prioritize what can we afford in our budget and what can't we afford. And so the positions that I'm recommending to you are ultimately, again, those that I think we need just to maintain our existing level of service. And that includes the addition of 2 police officers. So I know that they had requested 7. My or 9, I'm sorry, the difference being 7. I'm recommending 2. The reason for that is at the outset of the budget, and this number has changed a little bit in the last couple of weeks, but at the time that we were initially building this, there was 5 vacancies
That's what I was gonna ask.
within the police department. So my recommendation is to add 2, primarily to continue to stay up with population growth and service calls. But the focus within this year's budget was much, much more about filling vacant positions than it was adding new positions. And so in addition to the 2 positions that have been requested, I'm also proposing to revise the pay scale for entry-level police officers to increase that to be competitive with peers in our community. We've looked at Beaufort, Jasper counties, Hilton Head, Bluffton, SC, Department of Corrections, Highway Patrol, looking at all those different data points to kind of understand where do we need to be from an entry-level officer standpoint. So that combined with filling the PIO role at the police department. And I know Brianna just started a couple of weeks ago, and she is, when I mentioned it during the council meeting, she is sprinting, not running. She's really started to address a number of needs, and the hope is going to be that she will help not only creating materials, but being out and being able to market Hardeeville Police as a career opportunity, and then focus on helping to fill those vacancies. So between the 2 new positions, the adjustments to salaries, and then the PIO position, our focus this year is getting that vacancy number much, much less than what it has been. I'm also proposing a public works assistant director. I've talked to you about that before. I think that position would work well in conjunction with what Carla brought to our team in terms of being a PE and being able to look at things from a very technical standpoint. I think that we have the need for an assistant public works director who would work very closely with Carla, be able to take not only the technical aspects of it, but carry that information out in the field and oversee the crews that are working in the field in various areas. I'm also proposing 2 full-time building inspectors and the conversion of a part-time position to full-time. So ultimately, we would wind up with 3 additional full-time building inspectors, which would be bring our team to 10. And then ultimately, again, if we're in that range of having somewhere between 18 to 20 inspections per day, that would add about 60 inspections per day. Which again, knowing the backlog that we have right now, those would be very, very welcome. And it'll still take us a little bit of time to catch up. But I would tell you, leaving here today, and I'm going to restate this for when the mayor comes back because it's very important to me. But I would say, from a personnel standpoint, this is probably our most critical need. And so, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is understanding how important this service is to us right now and where we're at in terms of timing. If there is an overall level of comfortability from council that, generally speaking, maybe but for the millage discussion, but otherwise, if everybody's on board with the positions that I'm recommending, I'd like to move forward with those as quickly as possible. And so we've already had the job descriptions out and posted for some time. Sandy's already started performing interviews with folks. And so again, if we come out of this meeting and you all have a high level of comfortability that that's just not an aspect that we're going to really worry about going forward and that you're good with it, I would like to try to put that in place as quickly as I can, even bringing staff on before the start of the budget, the new fiscal year, assuming that we have the funding in this year's budget to pay for it. That's one piece of feedback I wanted to get from y'all.
Because I think the point Josh made is very important. Let's take a straw poll on this one particular issue, whether or not we want Josh to move ahead with these 8 positions. But before we do, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask?
He's kind of talked to us a little bit in the, our meeting things anyway,
Right.
so.
Right, and I've gone over it as well, so
Yep.
I don't have any further questions. But I think, we all know about getting the police department settled and everything. I'm okay with, let's go ahead and start this process moving. We're only talking about less than 2 months before the fiscal year begins. So those 2 months could be valuable.
If Josh, you need it that bad and stuff, that's why we have your judgment, so I don't have a problem.
Of these all positions, the building inspectors are the ones that I'd like to move forward with leaving this room today. The other ones can come online after the budget's adopted, but those just, again, because of our current schedule and the current demands, I'd like to move forward with those with your blessing.
10 to 12.
Absolutely. Do you have good candidates that slip into that?
Yeah, I know Sandy's been the boots on the ground looking at that, but I think she's got a couple of people that maybe even surprised her a little bit from the quality and the background that they were bringing.
That's another good reason to do it sooner, because they may not be available.
Good point, well, they may not be here.
All right, Sandy, Pam, y'all have heard. Move forth and prosper. All right,
I who's silver.
Let's take a straw poll.
please.
Bo?
Absolutely.
John? Yes?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
Yes, so straw poll is, go ahead with these additional 8 positions.
That's it. And they may not start till after the first, but at least moving forward, getting a start date, getting that on. Yes.
My question was, I'd heard both. I'd heard just the 3, but I'd also heard the 8. But if you're saying we can start the hiring process, and if we end up bringing somebody in a couple weeks.
We go ahead with the staff recommendations that the city manager is.
Okay, so it's all right.
Is
Okay.
everybody
I just want to make sure we were all
That way, at
clear.
least, Josh, you can start.
Absolutely. The other ones we'll start putting together
Absolutely.
the advertisements and getting that out there. All right. So this is looking at, and I think this is good information because this is something that folks want to know over time, kind of what is the total number of positions we have within our organization. So if you look back at last year, FY25, we had 190 positions total, 158 full-time and 32 part-time. We're proposing, again, we're going to convert a couple of those part-time positions to full-time and then add several more. So we're ultimately increasing by about 8 FYEs. But again, it's a very frequent question from members of the public. How big is your organization? How many people do you have? And then you can also see in here kind of between fire and police, a little bit more than half of our total personnel count is directly involved within public safety.
Is Sam having any more luck with, hiring?
Have you had any more luck with hiring?
We got some in queue right now, we're doing background.
That's it. I was gonna say, a couple months ago, I would have said it was pretty quiet. You hadn't had anything for a while, but here within the last couple of weeks, you've gotten some actual good candidates who have popped up on the radar. So I don't know if that we've necessarily done anything differently, but timing wise, he's got a couple of folks that are in the pipeline right now. And you know how he's very good about screening candidates and making sure that he's only bringing forward the best people that we have.
About that. He'd
Yep.
rather do without than get stuck.
Yep.
I know, I
Ab-
understand that.
I heard, the rumor I heard is that people don't want to work for him. That's why.
He's too hard on them, huh? Slave driver.
We tell him he's never in the office anyway, so you're never gonna see him. All right. So, just again, data points for you to consider. In the first budget workshop, you said bring me a budget that keeps the millage the same, and then bring me a budget that reduces it 1 mil. I've told all of you individually that I believe it's my responsibility that if I'm going to bring you a budget that reduces the millage, that we do so in a way that I think is the least painful to the city. I don't think we should use things like personnel or functions and hold them as leverage to get you to influence the budget one way or the other. So if you did move forward with reducing the budget 1 mil, my recommendation to you would be to make adjustments along the following. There are 2 projects that we have currently budgeted for this year. The first being a door access security project. It is taking and extending badge access to additional facilities that are owned by the city. The second is replacing the Public Works camera system. Again, there's an existing system in place, but this would be upgrading and then adding some additional cameras. And then in the facilities maintenance budget, both outside service and utilities are about a $500,000 line item. So for me, we can find $15,000 within those between now and the end of the year. So if you told me that we needed to reduce it, these are the ways that I think we could ultimately reduce it in a way that is going to be the least painful to the city moving forward. So that information is then for you to consider as you discuss adopting the budget. One thing that we did want to point out, so from the materials that you were provided, and I know we've talked about this, but if you actually went into the line items themselves, this number was not in here. I am proposing to increase the budget to include funding where we would lease office space for our building services department. The existing facilities that where they're at now, which is the Public Works building, is functional, but it is not ideal. Obviously, at a Public Works building, there's lots of noise, there's lots of smells, there's lots of things that are going on out there as the Public Works team is going about their daily business. When it comes to office work, that is a little bit distracting to say the least. So they've been out there for a while. I can tell you they've not complained about being up there, but if I want to hold staff to a high expectation standpoint, I think that their surroundings and office space need to reflect that same high level. And so I'm recommending to you to fund what would ultimately be a several-year lease of office space. The space that Neil helped us find is located on Argent Boulevard. So in a growth center for the city moving forward. It's in space that's being created right now by Farino, who's a good partner of ours and is commercially reasonable. And so this was not in the budget, even though we talked about it. And so wanted to let you know that we have since included it in the budget and how we are proposing to pay for it so that we maintain that balanced budget that was ultimately presented to you. So if there's any questions about that, be happy to answer them. But otherwise, just wanted to let you know that we discussed it, but that number wasn't in there. And so we've added it.
Is it in this book?
So I don't believe it was. And that's why we're flagging it and calling attention to it now, because it got left out of that
Is
spreadsheet.
it in the previous slides that you showed? Where is it?
So it will be in the line item budget for building services is where it will ultimately be housed. And so before Monday, we can get you an updated copy that reflects that money being in there.
Okay, and where you say using the fund balance, so that's not reflected in this book either?
Correct. So
That would reduce, and this expense would go up.
so this funding right here, $94,238 was budgeted as part of this budget year. We are not going to spend that money. We are not going to undertake the digital wall at this point in time. And so that is money that would ultimately go to our reserve fund and then could come back out of the reserve fund to pay for this. So we're just showing how that money would be moved from one side to the other of the ledger.
John, what were you gonna say?
Josh just covered it.
Okay.
And just, Mr. Mayor, to clarify, we didn't want to change a bunch of pages in the book. So the book is pure as you received it. But just like with what we just talked about, with what would a millage reduction look like, we also wanted to add this because this was something that is not added, that we certainly meant to add.
Right, no, and I understand, I just wanted to make sure I understood this. And, you know, so if you could replace the pages.
Yes, sir.
I mean, in fact, we're assuming, happy to do that, but the assumption is, you know, if you say, yes, we want to do that thing, then the next time we look at that spreadsheet, it'll have $80,000.
That's it.
Here's the question for council. What Josh is proposing is that we have, we go up on Argent Boulevard and rent space for $80,000, over $6,500 a month, and put building safety up there. So we need to take a straw poll to say, put this page into the budget. So before he does it, they're looking for a direction, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, if there's any concerns about it, now's the time to talk about it, and then we won't update it. Yeah.
May I make a comment before we do the straw poll?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
I think that the quality of staff that we want and the space that we have has to be correlated and work together. You don't find great people and put them in a dump and office space that is subpar, because that's not what they need to do in terms of their skill level, then go other places. So I think as we try and get better and better staff, not that we don't have good staff, but if we continue the quality that we have, these are the kinds of things that we're gonna have to do to augment that recruitment. And it seems like, well, why do we have to do it? But it's the conditions that people wanna work on. And that's a factor in coming here and how they're supervised, as much as a factor of pay, I think. And,
Yeah. And I would tell you that position is one where every other jurisdiction is typically actively hiring for building inspectors.
so it's a competitive situation.
I believe so.
I know that you know that, Harry, but I just wanted to share
No,
that.
but here, everything's a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
You're talking about $80,000 a year for an indefinite time period. So the question would be to staff, are we better if those office environments are less than desirable? What we made them more desirable and have a permanent, better office space there, rather than go, because once the 80,000's gone and 80,000 next year, you know, are we better off improving the space or going and renting?
Kind of a make or buy kind of
Yeah,
situation.
what's better for the long term? Because even if we move building safety some other time, whatever improvements you make to public works, it stays. Once they move out of the rental,
Yeah.
money's gone.
Have you been out to see their existing space? Because I think that is very helpful as part of this conversation. So right now, their office space is in one of the bays of Public Works. And so it's cubicle space in a very large bay area in the middle of the Public Works building.
And what I'm suggesting to you, and it's an analysis that I don't know. You may tell me it costs $1 million to renovate, and then the answer is clear. But is there an opportunity to create wall office space that is nice? Because if this is building safety, and Sandy, a lot of their time is out of here.
Well, I think the primary thing you need to consider are the people that are there all day long, that are affected by the gas fumes coming from the next bay, the sounds, the sirens going off that they're testing. And it also is taking away from space that Public Works actually uses when we weren't there. So there are a lot of things that you have to factor in.
I'm glad you spoke up because I didn't know those.
Short-term, long-term, ideally, when we talk about building a new city hall, it would be wonderful if we could have everybody under one roof. And that way people are easily accessible and we're not having to run all the different locations. But the reality of that option is that we're probably a minimum of 5 years away before I think having some serious conversations, primarily because, as we're going to talk next week, there's not a way to pay for a building that costs that much. So I'm seeing this as a 5-year lease. Could it be longer than that? It could be longer than that, but it's really bridging that gap between where we are now and where I'm hopeful we will be one day, which is talking about bringing everybody back to one singular campus.
Any other comments?
Well, when what all is in the building safety, what all is included in that?
So you've got all of our building inspectors, permit tech, Sandy, Chris. I'm not sure what else you'd have. I know you've got a little bit of
Plans examiners,
plans examiners, conference room.
right.
So I will tell you, we did a fairly exhaustive search, not necessarily just within the city limits, but around this area. There is surprisingly very little office space that is available.
We got some storage space.
That's it. And so this really represented an opportunity, and it checked a number of boxes, not only because it's quality office space, but it's in a high growth area where we're going to be sending a lot of those staff members anyway.
Mitchell Square alone, you'd have had.
Well, the cost of renovating that may have been a lot more than what we're going to pay in this rent.
Hey, John, we can put them in the old city jail.
That's true.
Oh, there you go.
But going back to what the mayor said a while ago, Mayor, even if we do consider what you were talking about, lease this by us a year. And then
Good point.
during that time, we can be looking in case something
point.
does come up.
Absolutely.
I'm satisfied
Yeah,
with Sandy's
Sandy's
answer.
explanation, 'cause
Help
it's also-
help clarify.
Yeah, that's a health hazard, what they're going through.
John made a good point, Bill made a good point. So any other points we want to make before I call for a straw poll? Okay, so we'll start with Valerie this time, and what we're going to take a straw poll on is renting the office space for $80,000. Are you for or against?
I am for it.
John?
For it.
For it.
I'm for it. Go.
Thank you. All right, I mentioned early on the changes to the merit increase. Again, just to emphasize it, it's collapsing both COLA and merit into one number. I would propose that we implement that at the outset of the budget adoption. So effective as of July 1st is when we would make the adjustments to salary. And then again, over the next fiscal year, we're going to work on gathering the data as part of the salary and compensation analysis. And we'll also revisit our performance evaluation system. That way, by the time we go to adopt next year's budget, we'll have a new system to roll out that's a little bit more in line with a one-time-a-year adjustment rather than a twice-a-year adjustment. And just to help kind of facilitate this conversation, John contacted a number of other organizations that are around this area just to kind of look at what they're doing. So you see that City of Beaufort's at 5%, Town of Bluffton's at 6%, Port Royal's 3%. Beaufort County, it indicated that they're not doing a percentage, they're doing a flat adjustment per position. So I'm not sure how they're necessarily going to roll that out, but ultimately, I think percentage-wise, or that dollar value is probably around 3, maybe 4%, if that. Hilton Head is just doing a flat 4%. Jasper County hadn't responded as of today's meeting. And then the town of Ridgeland, I think it's interesting to see that their note is they're not doing a COLA or merit this year because they did a salary and compensation study last year and are implementing the recommendations from it in this budget year. And that's why they're not doing an adjustment. So that might be where we find ourselves a year from now. Any questions on that?
I think that policy, that's a manager's decision, not a council. Thank you for explaining it to
Yep.
us, but I think that's your decision.
I appreciate that. I know it's been a conversation I've been having with staff. There was a lot of good feedback. I know that this is a significant change for staff. But just having seen what's happened the last couple of years, by doing a twice a year adjustment, when you start talking about 6, 7, 8% cumulatively, numbers like that just aren't sustainable at the local government level. And so I'm proposing this because, one, I think it's fair. I also think it does provide the biggest benefit to staff possible, because otherwise, if we were taking that 5% and say splitting it up 2.5% in July and 2.5% in December, by just giving them 5% as of July, it ends up financially being a little bit better. Now, when I say a little bit better, typically we're talking about a couple $100. We're not talking about big numbers, but it is still positive in terms of rolling it out once, rolling it out with a larger number at the beginning of the year, rather than breaking it up over twice a year. So I appreciate your support on that. Yes, sir.
Doing it once a year, also, if you do it twice, it takes a lot of administrative time, it takes a lot of cost. There's other factors associated with that, and so I think I'm in favor of once a year merit as opposed to twice for lots of reasons.
Thank you.
Which I just said.
I think it's cleaner, Bill, I agree with you.
Okay, and again, we've tried to present the slides in a similar manner as what we've done in the past for simplicity's sake. If you look at the last line there, the 2026 line item, again, that's the fiscal year. You see our assessed values continue to increase. You see the market value is between the real and personal property is almost $3.7 billion. So $3 billion more than we were a couple of years ago. So, a lot of good news in this chart. The next chart is historic millage and overlapping rates. And this speaks to, you see, we have our rates coming for the last 10 years. And then again, for both Jasper and for Beaufort County. Now, I will say, and as you see this for 26, you will continue to see the 25 numbers when we talk about 26 for, and again, that's the proposal from the city manager. But again, everybody acknowledges that's council's to make the final decision on, well, what we are going to present is going to be in line with what's in the rest of the book. So you can see here where we've gone from 130 down to 95 in Jasper County. And then if you go back to when we started reducing it, it was 153 a few years before that. So 58 mills have been reduced over the last dozen or so years.
Something else, while you're still on this, just something else to think about, and it's something that I've been thinking about, not for this budget year, but possibly for a future budget year, is thinking about maybe splitting out our millage from operations and debt. Right now, we take all of our debt payments and we roll it into our operating budget, and we just make those payments straight from our operating budget. But as you see here, a number of other places, including the schools and the county, break theirs out separately. And I think when we get to the point that we start taking on some of these larger capital projects, that we break that millage out separately, because it tells, I think, a clearer story between what we're borrowing money for. We're never borrowing money so that we can make payroll or that we can pay our operational expenses. We're borrowing money so that we can build things, put things in the ground, do other capital projects. And so right now, with the amount that we're borrowing, it's fairly nominal. We're talking a couple of mills. But when we start looking at some of these bigger projects, I think it would be easier to communicate to the public by breaking those two things out. So again, just planting a seed for a future discussion at some point that we may want to express that millage differently on the tax bill by showing an operating mill and then showing a debt millage.
Personally, I think that these separate debt things, I still don't understand the school debt service. I still don't understand what the county debt service is for, when it's going to be paid off, and how it's going to be paid off. I think for the layperson, the taxpayer, seeing that broken up is more confusing. That we should have one tax rate, period. And how that's managed is our job, okay?
Fair enough.
I don't know what the county, that's been there forever. The school debt service has been there for probably about 25 years. And it's never been explained. Even when I asked their lawyers, they couldn't explain what that is. I think the public is confused by those two things. And I prefer to keep one thing and then manage it in this book, personally.
Those debt numbers never seem to go down.
Yeah, I was gonna
They
say,
go
They
down.
never go there.
They never go down and they're never explained. When they're in this book, it's explained.
They're not gonna go down and they can't tell you where it goes.
Of course.
They can't account.
Of course, do you know how many years ago, there was a point at which that debt, which was incurred by Jasper County for the court and everything up
And
there,
annex
and for years, they had interest-only payments. In other words, the principal was never going down.
No, that's
Now, I
true.
think they've changed that, but
That is
again,
true.
being transparent to the customer, our constituents, on how we're spending our money, I think this is much more transparent.
okay.
That's my.
That's good feedback. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, this is a little something new. We started to present this last year. I don't know that we ever presented it publicly. I know we shared it with council. What we're trying to do here is show the cumulative effect over since we started reducing the millage back, and we, the city, started reducing the millage back in 2012. We have the value of 1 mil, and then you go across and you say, what is the fiscal year reduction for that year? Like here, it was 6 mils, so 6 times your 1760 is that. And then accumulation of what revenues the city didn't get because they were reducing the millage to save the taxpayers some millage costs. Now, this last column here is the cumulative impact for a household in a median priced house. Mr. Davis and I have only been tracking this since we got here and this first question first came up. So unfortunately, I don't have the data for going back in here. But I can say that, and I think this will be, Mr. Mayor, one of your questions is, what is the cumulative reduction for this year for having reduced the 58 mills? And that is $1,102 is what a taxpayer we're saving the average taxpayer in a medium-priced home for one fiscal year.
This year.
Just this year, yes, sir.
Again, if we had not had, but this chart shows, if we had not had a system of regular tax reduction, we would, just this year alone, taxpayers would be paying $1,100 more on top of the $300 to $500 that every one of us got less in rebates because of loss. Everyone who lives in this city, look at your tax bill, and you lost money because the rebate went down, because you have, the number of residents are not increasing or the revenue is not increasing as much as the rate of new residents. And so it's being split by more people, which means each one of us gets less of it. On top of that, the taxpayers of Hardeeville are gonna pay 1 additional % more in their sales tax. So we are giving, in essence, if we keep it the same, we are giving our taxpayers an increase in taxes substantially, in spite of the fact that we have such a tremendous increase in the revenues, not only over every year, but a cumulative over the year. And that's why, and we might as well go right into it. For me, I have always, from the day I came here, I've always believed that economic development would lead to lower taxes. And now we need workforce. We need people to buy the homes that we're building in East Argent, we're gonna build in West Argent and in the Morgan Tract. These are not retirement homes. These are people that are the workforce of tomorrow that we're building homes for. If our taxes are too high, they're not gonna be able to afford to come here. Because Bluffton, yeah, the land's more, but their taxes are 50 mils,
Yeah.
and they have a better school system than we do.
We have 2 more slides of additional information like this,
Okay.
if council would like to see that. Okay.
That total millage reduction number is impressive from 12 to 1.
Yeah, and you know what, that's something that we should all be proud of. Because think of all the things that we've done over the course of just since 2016, when I've been mayor and John started as council. Think of all the things we did, including a rec center, all the monies we put down here, everything we did, and at the same time, we reduced taxes. Everybody benefited. The taxpayer benefited, our Parks and Rec benefited, the police, fire, everything got increased. People got, our staff got tremendous increases every year, tremendous in relation to everyone else. So we've been able to accomplish both, and I think it would be a mistake if we stopped that trend. It's a core belief of me, and I think it should be a 1% mill, a 1 mil reduction is a drop in the bucket to the benefits we give and the incentive for people to move here. And
I'm going to say it my annual
where's
thing.
my soapbox?
It's a good story that ought to be told, because not only have you reduced that, but you've increased the quality of services, and that's hard to do. And yet, we don't publicize that, so James and Juan, wherever you are, there's a great story to
That's a
tell there.
great story. And you know what, with Josh's suggestions, we don't lose a thing in the services that we present to the public for next year. We don't, because there are things that we can wait a year, okay? And next year we'll figure it out. But we only do 1 year at a time, and we can do both with the suggestions that management has made to us, if that's what we want to do. I'm getting off my soapbox. I'll come back to that. Did you say you had more, John?
I did. This is a little bit of a different take. This is, every year, the state's Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office provides all the local governments the max that they would be able to increase their millage based on CPI and population changes. This just shows what the city could have done if, instead of looking to decrease it, they could have raised it. And I think the point that everybody would look at is we could have increased our millage 436% over the last 12 years, 13 years, should we have so desired. This is strictly just another way that other local governments look at it. It's not a commentary, it's simply just another set of data points.
It's primarily understanding Act 388 was legislation that was passed by the General Assembly that capped the ability of local governments to increase their millage year over year. And so the way it reads now under that legislation is the maximum amount that you can increase your budget is the combination of population increase and CPI, Consumer Price Index increase from the past year. And you are then allowed to look back a maximum of 3 years. So because we've not adjusted or increased any of our millage, it's good to know that we have a 3-year look back that, let's say, a lawsuit happens that's not covered by our insurance and we have to find, funding to be able to pay for that lawsuit. This comes into play. If some other kind of natural disaster happens, but we don't want to have to go out to the public for any kind of referendum, it's good to know, not that we're recommending or even requesting to increase the millage, but just to know that as a data point, this is what we are confined to pursuant to the terms of Act 388. All right.
If we do that, I'm leaving town under the cover of darkness.
Typically, it would be for some kind of unforeseen significant impact. Yeah.
If we had done that, I would have been assassinated years ago.
So for me, it's just,
I've seen Aaron for 5 years.
yeah, in addition to your rainy day fund, you have some flexibility here to a certain extent, so.
Correct.
All right.
And then next is, again, we polled our local government neighbors to see what they would do. You can see the city of Beaufort is looking at a slight increase possible, again, tied to the CPI. Bluffton and Port Royal had no increase planned. Beaufort County was still assessing the last time I talked to them. Hilton Head, as you've seen on the news, is looking to do a 2 mil decrease. Again, Jasper County, we did not hear back from, and then Ridgeland is proposing to increase by 2.9%. And then, as you see, City of Hardyville, TBD.
I think that's the end of the presentation.
And well, then we have one more, and that is the rainy day budget stabilization. Again, we did the same thing, council. We said, what does everybody else do? City of Beaufort has 28%. I'm gonna have a conversation with Chris at Bluffton, because he said he said it's calculated, but he wanted to walk me through what he did, so, and I'm sure that'll be fascinating and a learning exercise, so I'm looking forward to that. Beaufort County's at 30, Hilton Head's at 40 to 55, and Ridgeland is at 20, and then, of course, we are currently at 20 as well.
Now, understand, maybe Josh can confirm this. You know, you got Hilton Head and Beaufort, which, you know, with a minor rainstorm and they flood. So their rainy day fund is literally for the rainy days that come. So we're not on the May River like Bluffton, we're not on, you know, the Port Royal Sound, so we're not in the Atlantic like Hilton Head, so we don't have to be, good to know.
Apples and oranges.
Well,
Yeah.
it's apples and
It's just
oranges.
data points. We just wanted to be as thorough as we could in providing y'all information.
I think it's great. I learned something, and I'm glad you did, but I just wanted to point out the difference of us versus.
That's it. Our risk exposure is different for sure. And, you know, it's the classic eat well, sleep well analysis. Do you pay more for the insurance and sleep well knowing that you're protected because you've got a substantial reserve there? Or do you eat well now and use the funding that you have to do projects and provide services rather than stashing it away in a fund that you only use in a natural disaster? So there's definitely a balance there. I will say that there is a little bit of a correlation between these values and your bond rating. So the higher amount of cushion you have in reserve, it's like your credit rating. The more, you know, that you can demonstrate you have in assets, the higher your credit rating goes. We are no different.
And here's another thing I would propose to council to consider. If it comes to the point where, you know, we're undecided, to go up 1%, we've indicated to do is $291,000. But there's also, we may get $555,000 come back from the settlement, okay? So perhaps, rather than just use a percentage, we go up by a dollar amount. So if we went up $150,000 each year, and we increased that way instead of just pure percentages, because our budget's gone up so high every year. The percentages come out to
Yeah.
291. So what if we just went up $150,000 instead of 291? There's your mill, right there.
Right.
And so, but you're still better than you were, not only in percentage, but in the whole number. And that's why I go back to look at whole numbers as well. Our whole number would be up quite a bit.
That's a good point.
So that's something to consider, you know, and if you feel there's a crunch because of a decision we make, there's another option that I think we could look at.
Very much. I was approaching this as this is the starting point for us.
Exactly. Well, I'm
We've
just
not
giving
really-
you some
That's it.
ideas.
Yeah.
I'll be comfortable with 20% all along, to be completely candid.
I know, you know, and, you know, that's another option. We can.
But if you just leave it at, and then go, you saying leaving it at 20% and go up and put in 150,000 or whatever.
So it would be 20.2.
And then next year, and then we may get that 555 on top of that. So that'd be what,
And then you wouldn't have to
700,000?
do it next year, or
That's right,
you might be
yeah.
up to 22%.
Yeah.
If we didn't have to increase millage and we didn't have to sacrifice programs or services, I would tell you a good goal would be 25%. It's more than the minimum. It's not certainly as much as what other communities do. I think that leaves us as best prepared. And again, as long as we're not having to take any kind of drastic actions to get there, it's just a good fiscal practice. But in terms of priority, it's likely gonna fall, down when it comes to having to take and appropriate funds.
And the 25% was when we had the strategic planning retreat, that was the number that we left with, was that we wanted to have a pathway to get to 25%.
So I think we have one other straw poll that we have to take, even though Steve's not here, and in all fairness, he has consistently opposed lowering the millage. But
Not lower, leaving it. Leaving it.
he wanted to leave it, he didn't want to lower it. Of course, he hasn't heard the arguments today, and we would present them again, but at least so that staff can come away with some idea of what the council is thinking. Doesn't mean we can't change our mind and vote differently when it comes, but let's take a straw poll do we want to lower by a mill? So first, any comments, questions by council regarding that subject before we take a straw poll? Okay, I think we're back to Bo being first. Bo, are you in favor?
I'm in favor. I think that with what we've heard and the leadership of our finance from Josh, that we can do that without hurting anything. And so I'm in favor.
John?
Right now, think we just leave it alone.
Val?
Leave it alone.
Change. So we're gonna have to, it's, right now, leave the reports the way they are. We're gonna have to, I suggest, and Josh and I talked about this before, we have next week is capital, but we save 15 minutes for the arguments to be represented to Steve, and and then take another straw poll before we go to first reading.
How about with this? Are we not gonna do anything with this right now? About the percentage and,
Let's take another straw poll. Do we want to leave it at 20%? Do we want to take a whole number, or do we want to raise it by 1%? Val, this is
Is it 150 your whole number? Was that what you?
that was what I would propose,
No,
but
that's a good-
again, there's three choices here. Let's give direction on how at least the four of us want to go. Leave it at 20. 1% is 291, adding to the budget. Or three, put a whole number like 150. You could propose 100, you could propose 200. The whole number is, I put 150 because it would be 20.5 instead of 21.
I mean, I can swing either way on the two options. I knew it was gonna go there.
Okay, so you're undecided.
Yes, I can go the 1% or I can go the whole number.
Okay,
Yeah, as long as we are doing something about it,
but
because.
less than the 1%.
Well, I think I'll stay with the 1%. Because,
stay
because I mean, things are getting expensive every single day. It's like either we do it properly or we don't do it at all. I
And
mean,
don't forget now, Val, about the 555.
Well, is that going in there too?
So right now, I'm not,
If we get
If
it.
we get it.
that's it, I was gonna say, I'm not proposing to change the percentage. We're gonna be
Right.
just,
If we get
we're
it.
gonna be just above 20% with the budget that's been presented. If the funding comes about that's available through the settlement, that would be my recommendation to you, is probably do a combination of take a portion and put towards capital projects and take a portion and put towards your rainy day fund, which that could be
I
the
like
one,
that.
that could be the 1%.
Yes.
But if that doesn't come about, I'm not proposing to change it this year. Again, we're just understanding where you're at in terms of goals, that way we can build it in going forward for the future budgets.
So you're undecided, basically, and John would,
I agree with what the suggestion that you made.
leave it at 20, and if we get
Add
the
a-
550.
Well, add 150,000,
Add the whole number.
add 150,000, and then hopefully we get the other two on top of it, but put 150,000 in it.
And I'm in favor of the whole number, 150,000.
Me too.
Good. I think that covers all the different aspects of the operating budget. And the hope with this workshop was that if there are any changes that you want to see, or if there's any additional information or data that you need, we can bring that back to you at first reading. But otherwise, this is what we will present at first reading for your consideration.
You look cute.
Yeah. That's Halloween next year.
And for you, our suggestions is workable, is the conclusion I've come to as I've followed your charts and what you've said. We haven't given you
Absolutely.
a hurdle you can't clear.
No, at this point, with the support that you've had from a personnel and office space standpoint, I'm ecstatic. I'm excited to move forward with this budget.
John, do you have a question?
For clarification, since we had the straw poll to go with the 150,000, we saved 141,000.
If we didn't go with the
If we did that, right, we
1%.
saved 141,000,
By not going to
took
20.
to the 1%.
Yeah.
But that 291 wasn't in there, sir.
Well, but it would be.
If we went
If it went up,
1%, yeah.
That's what would take out.
So, yeah, so you're saying you did about half, you did
So basically, so anyway, we
not
had
quite half.
141,000 savings.
To your point, John.
Like, you know where I'm
but you're-
going.
I know where you're going, and so if we say 150,000, and they gotta go find 150,000, because it's not in there.
Instead
If
of
we
290.
stay, what they have presented is if we stay at 20%.
Okay.
So, so it's a plus 150, it's
Right.
not a minus 140.
But if we went with the 1%, you'd have to come up with 291,000.
Absolutely, which again, we can go back in the budget and we can figure out where that comes from if that's your priority.
Well, and
But it's also, one thing that we could do is leave this budget as is, which is 20%, in anticipation of the 555, and then put 291 in at that time. And if it doesn't happen, it stays at 20%, and we relook at it next year.
And I think
And
that's,
I'm-
and I
I'm
think
good-
that's a
I'm good
phenomenal
with
idea.
that.
I think that's great.
And then
That's a phenomenal
When,
idea.
when we go to look at next year, rather than talking in terms of percentages, we'll just talk in terms of dollar value and figure out where we're at and what we might feel
That's
comfortable
a
with.
phenomenal idea.
So if we get the 555, we just note that 291 goes into
The rate.
raising it to 21%, and you do whatever with the rest of it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then we're staying at 20. And then next
And
year,
then next year we look
we
at it.
will look at it.
Phenomenal
Sounds
idea.
good.
is that the updated straw poll?
Do we need a straw poll for that, Harry?
There's not
I don't know,
a,
we need to know. Do we need to go with that, Harry, a straw poll, or is that?
That's the
I think
updated
that's a
straw
good
poll,
idea.
right?
I think that's
I
That's
don't
the
know.
updated straw poll is to leave it the way it is with the note that the 550, should it arrive, we will raise to 21% at that time.
And then look at the 1% the following year.
Every year is a separate year.
Yeah.
We can only do 1 year at a
Right.
time.
Right.
well, that is the end of our presentation. Are there any other questions that you have about the operating budget? All right, good deal.
Thank you.
We will see you all next week for the capital budget. We're gonna do something very similar, except we're gonna go kind of really thorough details about what the capital budget looks like. I think so.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Awesome. So we'll see you this time. Same bat time, same bat channel.
We have our meeting that day.